5 Sahel nations join forces to combat terrorism. How gene therapy is restoring sight for blind patients with hereditary eye disease. And traveling the Silk Road on a Beijing runway. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening, I'm Esther Gitu. You at Info Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. The ambush that killed 4 U.S. Special Forces soldiers in Niger has drawn attention to the deteriorating security situation in parts of the Sahel sub-region of sub-Saharan Africa. VOA's Mariama Diallo reports on the efforts by the Group of 5 Sahel nations, Burkina Faso, Mali, Mauritania, Niger and Chad, to establish a joint military force to tackle terrorism threats in the region as representatives visit the United States this week to make their case.
The Group of 5 defense and foreign ministers on a visit to the United States reiterated the dangers they face. Malian Foreign Minister Abdoulaye Diop spoke about the latest ambush on Tuesday.
Mr. Abdourahmane Niang, who is the member of the Malian Parliament and the chairperson of the High Court of Justice of Mali, he was traveling in the region of Tenenkou, in the region of Mopti, and his car and convoy came under the attack. It was ambush. Unfortunately, the driver has died, as well as 5 soldiers who came at their rescue.
Diop said this kind of attack has become common and they're facing a transnational threat in the region.
It is urgent to deploy the G5 Sahel Joint Force with the mission to combat terrorism and international organized crime, but also the need to work collectively to provide assistance and support to the G5 Sahel.
The United Nations Stabilization Mission in Mali, MINUSMA, was established in 2013. France also has 3,000 soldiers in Mali in Operation Barkhane. Ivory Coast's foreign minister says the work of the G5 Sahel group will complement what already exists in the region.
Le Burkina Faso compte près de 1,800 hommes.
Burkina Faso has about 1,800 soldiers in MINUSMA in Mali, but we think that's not enough to protect our countries and borders. In 18 months, we've had 80 attacks, mostly in the borders, but 2 big ones in Ouagadougou, and has caused the death of 134, including some from the west. So this is a global threat.
On Monday, the Trump administration expressed its commitment to stabilize the Sahel region and support the G5 counterterrorism efforts.
We are proud to announce today that we plan to provide up to $60 million in bilateral assistance, which we will work with our Congress to identify to help stand up the joint force.
Chad Foreign Minister welcomed the move.
Les 60 millions sont la première plus grande contribution.
This is the biggest contribution we've gotten so far, and we thank the U.S., but we hope that more money will be pledged at our upcoming meeting in Brussels in December so that this joint force can gear up and declare war on terrorism.
Commenting on the recent deaths of 4 American soldiers, Niger's foreign minister says his government is working with the U.S. to find out what happened.
We
owe it to the family members of the dead soldiers, but also for us so we can draw lessons, because this conflict, where these soldiers lost their lives, is not over.
He adds that terrorism has no borders or colors. It's a global threat that needs to be dealt with, a fight the G5 is committed to wage.
Now for more on the efforts to establish a joint military force to tackle terrorism threats in the Sahel region, I'm joined by VOA's Mariama Diallo. Mariama, welcome to Africa 54. And when you talk to these officials, Mariama, how dire do they say the security situation is in that region?
Well, let me point out real quick that actually we just want to correct that it's the Burkina Faso Foreign Minister Alpha Bari instead of the Ivory Coast. We were trying to maybe correct that on time, but didn't have time to do it before the show. So just making sure that's on the record. But when they talk about this dire situation, obviously, can you imagine being ambushed, you know, in a car and fighting for your life? I think it's just like feeling like you are almost in some kind of a war zone. And when you talk about from the Malian minister and from the Burkina Faso minister, he talked about having 80 attacks, I mean, in 18 months. It's just, it's unbelievable. And now they are going on with their lives thinking this is like a daily occurrence. And the other issue that actually didn't make it to the piece was the other consequences, like children are staying at school. Civil servants are not going to work because they're afraid for their lives.
You know, when countries are faced with such kind of security threats, sometimes they go it alone when they want to fight this enemy. But now this is the whole region, 5 countries. Are they talking about coordinating their efforts to confront a common enemy?
Well, I think all of them at some point have wanted to just take care of what's happening inside their own borders. But at this point, when they realize that, you know, the borders are loose. I mean, and all of them share borders here and there. And sometimes you can be secure, but if your neighborhood is not secure or the country that's next to yours is not secure, eventually it's going to come to you. And they're calling it a transnational kind of a problem right now. And that's why they decided, let's do it together. Let's work together.
So very quickly, what do they expect to see at the Brussels meeting?
I think the Brussels meeting, they are probably thinking about asking for more money. Right now, their budget is about $450 million. And we've heard that, you know, some countries have pledged, including them, the member countries, about 57 million that the European Union talks about matching. We also have the United States that pledged another $60 million. But that is not, so about, I think they have about 168, including those amounts. But that's not enough.
Well, thank you, Mariama, for your insight into this. VOA's Mariama Diallo talking to us here in the studio. Now, well-wishers gathered for a candlelight vigil in New York City Wednesday to remember the 8 people killed on Tuesday when a man drove a rented truck down a bike path in Lower Manhattan. Candles flickered near the photo of one victim as those attending the vigil sang for peace and solidarity against terrorism.
I think it's very important. The significance of New Yorkers coming together, regardless of our backgrounds, to say we reject hate, we reject violence, we reject senseless violence that we saw yesterday and we've seen in far too many places across this country and far too frequently.
The act that happened really is upsetting because when a Muslim does it, the whole religion is blamed for it. But if another race does it, it's the lone wolf. So it makes me feel like I'm also part of the problem. But when, you know, Islam's really not like that.
Saifullah Saipov is accused of driving the truck that struck and killed those 8 people before ramming onto a school bus and injuring 4 people. Saipov got out of the truck waving a paintball gun and a pellet gun moments before a police officer shot him in the stomach. Federal prosecutors have formally brought terrorism charges against Saipov, saying he was spurred to attack by the Islamic State group's online calls to action. Now, Tuesday afternoon's terror attack in New York has quickly become a hot political issue after President Trump blamed a visa program he said the suspect, originally from Uzbekistan, took advantage of. VOA's White House Bureau Chief Steve Herman reports.
As New York City police Wednesday continued to examine the scene of the terrorist attack, President Trump told reporters after a cabinet meeting he wants Congress to immediately work on getting rid of the diversity lottery program that he blames for allowing the suspect to enter the U.S. 7 years ago.
Diversity lottery sounds nice. It's not nice. It's not good. It's not good. It hasn't been good. We've been against it.
Trump said he prefers a merit-based visa program, which he believes would be better for U.S. security and the economy.
And we want to get rid of chain migration. This man that came in, or whatever you want to call him, brought in with him other people. And he was the point of contact, the primary point of contact for, and this is preliminarily, 23 people that came in or potentially came in with him. And that's not acceptable.
In a pre-dawn tweet hours earlier, the president blasted the top Senate Democrat for the lottery. This led to a backlash by Democrats, including New York's governor, who accused the president of politicizing the attack.
The president's tweets, I think, were not helpful. I don't think they were factual. I think they tended to point fingers and politicize the situation. He was referring back to a immigration policy that dealt with a lottery and blaming people who passed that immigration policy.
Terrorism analysts are also skeptical that ending the diversity visa program would improve U.S. security.
We're not only facing an international terrorism problem in terms of people from overseas coming here. That's less of an issue than I think the problem of homegrown violent extremism, where individuals born, raised in the United States are pushed down this same path to violent extremism.
President Trump is also suggesting fundamental changes to the U.S. justice system, saying it needs to be stronger and much quicker to deal with terrorists like the one who struck in New York City on Tuesday. Steve Herman, VOA News, at the White House.
European leaders have been offering their condolences and support in the wake of New York terror attack. The suspect, Saifullah Saipov, has reportedly lived in America since arriving from Uzbekistan in 2010. Henry Ridgwell tells us there have been several similar attacks on so-called soft targets in Europe.
British Prime Minister Theresa May wrote on Twitter she was appalled by this cowardly attack. My thoughts are with all affected. Together we will defeat the evil of terrorism. But how? New York's governor called it a lone wolf attack with no evidence of a wider plot. This underscores the changing global terror threat, says security analyst Afzal Ashraf.
A change that has occurred progressively since the 9/11 attacks, where larger plots are now being replaced by these so-called lone wolf attacks using readily available equipment such as vehicles.
The New York attack echoes recent terror incidents across Europe. In June, 3 attackers used a van to hit pedestrians on London Bridge, then used knives to attack passers-by. Less than 3 months earlier, a lone attacker drove into pedestrians in Westminster before fatally stabbing a police officer. London authorities have since installed barriers on several key roads, but it's impossible to fully protect against such attacks, say experts.
We're talking about an enormous number of areas where we're talking about billions, possibly of dollars worth of protective barriers. And all of these barriers will, of course, be successful, but the terror threat will move on.
In France, the Prime Minister described the New York attack as a stark reminder of the global threat.
Le niveau de menace est élevé. Il est élevé. The threat level is high around the world, and our objective is to provide credible answers, firm answers, and to guarantee a high level of security for French people.
France has suffered more than most, with hundreds killed in recent attacks in Paris and Nice. French President Emmanuel Macron Tuesday signed a new anti-terror law with sweeping powers.
I will also allow for very specific measures to fight against terrorism by allowing particular raids or by having measures on a case-by-case basis against identified individuals.
US President Donald Trump wrote on Twitter that he has ordered more robust extreme vetting of travellers. Europe is unlikely to follow that path, says Ashraf.
It's not at all clear to me that there is a form of vetting which will increase the already present safeguards sufficiently to detect potential terrorists.
Security analysts stress it is almost impossible to fully protect against so-called lone wolf terrorists intent on causing harm. Henry Ridgwell for VOA News, London.
Now to East Africa, where Kenya's Chief Justice says the National Police Chief has stepped up the security of Supreme Court judges, denying a Reuters report that a request for extra security was turned down. The judges' safety was thrust into the spotlight last week after one of their bodyguards was shot. The next day, 5 out of the 7 judges failed to come to the court to issue a judgment on an election petition that sought to delay the next day's presidential poll. This sparked widespread speculation of intimidation. A government spokesperson says Deputy Chief Justice Philomena Mwilu has been allocated 6 police officers to guard her after the shooting of her bodyguard, who is in hospital in a stable condition. Leaders in the Economic Community of West African States and the African Union are looking to avert a crisis in Liberia. They've met with candidates of the country's election and urged for calm. This follows a Supreme Court ruling halting preparations next week of presidential runoff vote amid allegations of fraud. Former soccer star George Weah and Vice President Joseph Boakai were set to face off on November 7th, but a losing candidate, Charles Brumskin, claims there was fraud in the first round. He's accusing outgoing President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf of interfering in the October vote by holding private meetings with election magistrates. Now, Boakai's ruling Unity Party has announced it is backing the legal challenge. Speaking at the court, Liberia's Director of Public Judicial Information, Daro Nma, says the stay of order is not final.
It is important to note that this alternative rate issued to stay any and all actions in respect of the pending runoff elections is not, and we repeat, is not a final stay order by the Supreme Court. This is only until the full bench can hear and dispose of the matter from which a final decision will be made by the bench. It is also important to note that this alternative rate is also not an annulment of the presidential and representative elections held on October 10, 2017, as no election matter has come before the Honorable Supreme Court of Liberia for determination.
The Supreme Court's decision is an example of an increasingly assertive role some African judiciaries are playing in overseeing elections after Kenya's Supreme Court annulled the results of its presidential election in August. We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Coming up, a breakthrough treatment for hereditary eye disease. Stay with us.
In notes, this is Living Better.
We said, what if we offer yoga, mindfulness, incredible nutrition, fitness pals, fitness on demand? They said, sure, Jim. I'm not sure they thought it would work, but it did.
That's Dr. James Hudziak with the University of Vermont, which has a growing wellness environment study program. Students can meditate for college credit.
We teach and practice these health-promoting activities. When things get tough, you'll rely on a whole new set of skills. It's called incentivized-based behavioral change. We incentivize you, pay you essentially.
Freshman Jenna Nicoletti agrees.
Being around people who have the same values and want to live a healthier lifestyle will definitely benefit me later on in life, because I think I will carry out this as I move along.
Students stay in alcohol and drug-free dorms and are given incentives such as a free gym membership. I'm Martin Seacrest for VOA's Living Better.
It's time now for Thursday's Health Report, and joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Mudu with new details on blood tests and pregnancy. Lino?
Oh, that's right, Esther. In a new research conducted in the United States, researchers say a blood test in the first 12 weeks of pregnancy could indicate a risk of miscarriage or premature birth. The proposed blood test screens for molecules called microRNA found in blood cells in the placental bed. The team from the Laboratory for Reproductive Medicine and Immunology in San Francisco assessed the microRNA cells' ability to predict premature birth and miscarriage, among other things, during the first 12 weeks of pregnancy. They looked at 160 births over a series of 4 published studies. The results predicted miscarriage with about 90% accuracy and premature birth before 34 weeks with about 89% accuracy. The researchers say they need larger follow-up studies to be sure whether these results are valid. Now, Belgian scientists say they have established a clearer connection between sugar and cancer. The researchers have been working on the link between sugar and cancer since 2008 in order to better understand the Warburg effect, a process where tumor cells create energy to grow through a fast breakdown of glucose, which does not occur in normal cells. They found that yeast with high levels of sugar, known as glucose, overstimulated the same proteins often found mutated inside human tumors, making the cells grow faster. The researchers say these findings provide a foundation for future research in this domain. Observers say it does not prove that eating a low-sugar diet could change a cancer diagnosis. The study was published in the journal Nature Communications. Now, an experimental gene therapy allows for vision by replacing a defective gene. VOA's Deborah Block tells us how the breakthrough treatment helped restore vision to a teenager who has his sights on a singing career.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound.
Several months ago, Christian Guardino's fabulous voice landed him on a national television show, America's Got Talent. Although he is able to see today, the 17-year-old was blind for most of his life from a rare hereditary eye disease.
Music was therapeutic.
Guardino was born with Leber congenital amaurosis. People with LCA lack a protein needed by the retina part of the eye. The retina is tissue at the back of the eye, which converts light into signals to the brain that allow us to see and understand objects. When Guardino was a baby, his mother noticed something was wrong with his eyesight.
You know, when I would feed him, he would not look directly into my face. He would stare at whatever light source was in the room.
Once her son was diagnosed, his mother didn't know what to do, since she'd never heard of another case of LCA, which may be hidden for generations.
We didn't have anyone really to understand what we were going through.
But eventually help was on the way. When Christian Guardino was 12, he took part in trials for a revolutionary gene therapy called Luxturna. Doctors inject a modified virus that contains the corrective gene into a patient's retina.
After the intervention, when the correct copy of the gene is delivered to their retinas, they can begin to see.
Guardino and other patients started to get their vision within only a month. And while the teenager's vision is not perfect, he is no longer legally blind.
The moon, the sun, the stars, all sunsets have been the most stunning thing, I think.
However, the downside is the enormous cost of the gene therapy. More than 260 genes can cause inherited retinal disorders, affecting 3 million people worldwide. Deborah Block, VOA News.
And that's our health report for today. To stay in touch, find me on Twitter @Lenore Moudou. Back to you, Esther.
Thanks, Lenore. Be sure to watch Lenore Moudou's health reports every Tuesday and Thursday on Africa 54. It's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54. China's Silk Road project inspires a fashion collection. We'll be right back.
In Tunisia, a hardline Islamist stabbed 2 policemen in front of parliament, seriously wounding one of them. In Liberia, the Supreme Court has halted next week's presidential runoff election between the former soccer star and the vice president. In Gambia, a gift of more than 50 double-cabin pickup trucks given to the country's National Assembly members has raised concerns, saying that the government should not accept gifts that could be used to exert undue influence. President Salva Kiir is in Sudan for a 2-day visit aimed at resolving border disputes and will decide on a roadmap to improve bilateral ties. Finally, in Ethiopia, the Food and Agricultural Organization, FAO, says there is a need to meet the growing demand for wood fuel among refugee communities living in Gambela.
And welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending. The baby business is booming in Britain. Babies have always needed cots, cribs, and carriages. But what is different, retailers say, is just about everything from eating and sleeping to playing and learning. Parents today are spending more on products which have been designed to make their lives easier. There's the baby food blender that steam cooks and blends simultaneously, self-sterilizing feeding bottles, and self-rocking buggies. There's even an electric thermometer that takes readings of your baby's temperature and feeds the information to an app on your phone and offers suggestions for symptoms. Next up, Harvard University scientists have released video of the latest exploits of RoboBee, a multi-purpose air-water micro-robot they've been working on for 12 years. In the video montage, the tiny floating device dives into water and swims before an internal combustion system ignites to propel it out of water onto land. And the robot swims to the surface. Surrounding water collects in a chamber. Inside the chamber, an electro-like plate produces oxyhydrogen, helping RoboBee's wings push it out of the water, letting it fly again before landing safely. Potential uses for the RoboBee could include search and rescue operations, environmental monitoring, and biological studies. And finally, Silk Road culture is on trend at China International Fashion Week in Beijing. Designs in different textures and patterns were dyed with handmade colors. The collection blends the distinctive cultures of China, India, Persia, Arabic world, ancient Greece, and ancient Rome, combined with modern cultural elements. Some 110 events, including 89 professional shows, 3 competitions, and a fashion award ceremony, will be held during the 10-day Fashion Week. And that's what's trending today. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight, at 1800 UTC, and in the mornings to Daybreak Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks for watching, and good night from Washington.
Welcome to English in a Minute. Most people enjoy listening to music. But is this expression actually about songs and tunes?
Music to my ears.
Jonathan, I cannot believe we have to work over the weekend.
Did you not hear the news? The meeting for the project got canceled. No work this weekend after all.
Awesome! That is music to